So I've been. I know some of y'all you're skeptical of the polling, but it's the only data we have to really assess the race, and thus far in the primaries, it's actually been pretty good. So I'm rolling with it. And but here's the problem: before you turn me off, just listen to this. The Democrats believe the polling, whether you do or not. Democrats believe the polling, and they're choosing to ignore the data. This is part of the problem. And I wrote part of the problem with being in the bubble. And I wrote about this morning. This is my morning email before the show notes. So you can text data to 33777, subscribe. The Democrats are in such a bubble, they're not willing to listen to the American public. The Democrats, cannot conceive of Donald Trump winning in November. They didn't in 2016 either. Remember, Hillary Clinton actually moved resources in the primaries in 2016 to help Trump get the GOP nomination because she was convinced he would be the easiest one to beat. And look what happened. I mean, to this day, they can't honestly assess how terrible Clinton was as a candidate. They had to blame Russia when it wasn't Russia spinning a few ads on Facebook that did it. It was the Clinton campaign. They were terrible. They thought the whole world would be like Brooklyn. Wrong. The Democrats have a real and serious problem, and it is this, in a nutshell. Donald Trump can and probably will be elected president in November. Let me say this again. Granted, we're in early February. Events change things. The data can change. Some of the polling has shifted. But Donald Trump can and very well will become president of the United States in November. And the Democrats cannot conceive of it happening, which is one of the very reasons it will happen. They're not listening to the American public. The Democrats are in a bubble. You can get in a bubble. I can get in a bubble. We can all get in bubbles where it becomes an echo chamber. We're only listening to people who already agree with us, so we get the amens and the hallelujah chorus. And frankly, I think online Republicans are very in danger of being in a bubble. Frankly, I think one of the problems with the DeSantis campaign, I still haven't written about it, but I need to. One of the biggest problems with the DeSantis campaign is they got into a very online bubble. And so much of the DeSantis messaging and strategy was catering to the people who were giving them the amens on social media, and they just interpreted that as reflecting reality, and it absolutely did not. It's easy to get in a bubble. Hard to get out of a bubble. It is perhaps hardest of all to get out of the Democrats' bubble. Because who's in the bubble with the Democrats? The media. CNN announced this morning they're getting rid of Phil Mattingly from their morning show. I'm a big Phil fan, by the way. I like Phil a lot. He's a super nice guy, a straight shooter. He may be an Ohio State fan, but I try not to hold that one against him. I kid. Got a lot of Ohio State listeners. I'm sorry, the Ohio State. He's a good dude. Was their White House correspondent, moved to the anchor's chair. Young, energetic, plays it straight. I like him. They're bringing Jim Acosta in for a daily show on CNN. They're just going to go MSNBC Light if they're bringing Acosta in, and that's part of the problem. Who's in the bubble? It's people like Acosta. They're all in this bubble with the Democrats. They all hate Donald Trump. Even the members of the media in this bubble, they hate Donald Trump. They cannot conceive of anyone voting for Donald Trump. They do not know anyone voting for Donald Trump. They despise anyone who might consider voting for Donald Trump, and therefore they shut out any contrarian views, and those contrarian views sometimes turn out to be right. The data is screaming at the Democrats. The data is screaming. Or I'm sorry, the data are screaming. It's plural, Mr. Erickson. You can hear it. Let me blow your mind. This is wild. This is wild. This is going to hurt your head a little bit when you hear it. So just listen to me say it. I'm going to say it twice so that you understand my point, and then I'll explain it to you because you need to understand this point. More Americans believe Joe Biden is doing a good job as president than want him to run for re-election. said a little less brain itching. There are more Americans who think Joe Biden is doing a good job than there are Americans who want him to run for re-election. Now, you're thinking, how are there more? Because you're thinking majority. No. 41% of Americans think Joe Biden is doing a good job, according to NBC News. 41% of Americans think Joe Biden's doing a good job. Only 38% in the same poll want him to run for re-election. So you can say within the margin of error, but the numbers are striking. Fewer people want him to run for office than think he's doing a good job. And even then, that's not a large number. In your casual conversations with your Democratic friends, if you have them, you know age comes up. They may say, well, Trump's old too, but that's an acknowledgement that Joe Biden is old. The number is there. The data is there. The data is visible for anyone who wants to pay attention to reality and get outside the bubble. Americans do not like Joe Biden, but you know the more striking data from the NBC poll? Yes, it is true that if Donald Trump is convicted of a crime, enough Americans would change their opinion on Donald Trump. They would go for Joe Biden. But you know what the data also shows? That number might actually not really be true, because it's not a huge number. And some of those, when asked other questions, the answers to those questions begin to present as people who are telling you they'll switch to Biden because they expect that that's the answer you want, and they're too ashamed to admit they'd stick with Trump. Remember, Donald Trump tends to outperform his polling, and the reason Donald Trump tends to outperform his polling is because there is an entire orchestrated campaign to get people to be ashamed of supporting Donald Trump. And so if Donald Trump is convicted of a crime and you're a horrible, awful, unpatriotic American if you support a man convicted of a crime, what are you going to tell the pollster? You're going to tell the pollster, I wouldn't vote for him if he's convicted of a crime, even though you would vote for him if he's convicted of a crime. You just don't want to admit it. You don't want to acknowledge the truth because you know that there's a bullying campaign against people like you. So the Democrats, by orchestrating a bullying campaign against people who might vote for Donald Trump, are causing people to lie to pollsters. And if you ask the right questions in the right sequence, you kind of get the fact that the people are lying about it. And the reality is Donald Trump can and probably will become president of the United States in November. You know where he's gaining votes? Young black men and Hispanic voters, not just men. In the Hispanic community, men and women both are becoming Trump supporters. Why? Crime and jobs and the economy. There was an MSNBC survey last week. They were doing a focus group of younger black men, and one of them actually said, we had jobs when Donald Trump was president. For all the good news about the economy right now and the macroeconomic picture and the relative rate of employment, you know one of the big issues with the relative rate of employment? It's people working multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. So they're not getting benefits. They're making money to make ends meet. They're classified as having a full-time job when really it's part-time jobs. And people were working full-time jobs and making ends meet when Donald Trump was president. The Democrats have worked themselves into this bubble. And the press is so far in the bubble as well. They themselves they can't understand. Americans are screaming at them. All the data flashes red for Democrats that you have massive problems. And what they say is, yeah, there are problems, but they're manageable and Trump can't win. I can't tell you the number of Democrats that I encounter who just tell me flat out Trump can't win. You said the same thing in 2016, and you've justified your answer by claiming mythologically that it was the Russians who stole the election, despite all the evidence to the contrary that it was Hillary Clinton and her terrible campaign. You know what this race reminds me of? I've said this before, but let's jump into the Wayback Machine. The 2024 presidential race reminds me of the 1992 presidential race, but the parties are reversed. In 1992, the macroeconomic picture in this country had changed, and economically, the country was roaring back to life after a recession, a post-war recession after the Gulf War, and the country was roaring back to life. All the economic metrics had improved. The rate of growth in the country was up, layoffs were down, joblessness had declined, full unemployment was on the horizon, people's wages were exceeding inflation, people were back to work. Everything was good, but at the macroeconomic level, people still didn't feel it. Their kids still didn't have jobs. Their neighbors didn't have jobs. Yes, people were starting to go back to work, but they were struggling to get back ahead. They felt like they had fallen behind and it was going to take too long to get ahead. And the Bush administration, the George H.W. Bush administration, and their pundits and prognosticators and editorial columnists were all screaming at people, you don't know how good it is. The economy is roaring. The macroeconomic picture is wonderful, and that's going to trickle down to you. You have no idea how good you have it. And then, the Republicans became convinced with the macroeconomic picture improving, the Democrats had nominated a draft-dodging pothead with woman issues from a trailer park in Arkansas. And no American in their right mind would vote for a draft-dodging pothead with woman issues from a trailer park in Arkansas. And how did that go for you Republicans? Now in 2024, the Democrats tell us the macroeconomic picture is fantastic. All the talking heads in the media say, why are people so upset and ungrateful? The economy's doing so well. Look at all the data. Look at all the data. Who cares about your gas prices? Who cares about your grocery bill? Who cares about your salary in terms of inflation? It's all coming back. Wages are outpacing inflation right now. Joblessness, it's low. You're working multiple jobs, but at least you're making ends meet. And who cares about your grocery bill? And who cares about your kids? Because the macroeconomic picture is great. And oh my gosh, there is no way y'all will vote for a man who was accused of rape and lost a defamation lawsuit, and he's got multiple indictments, and he's a horrible human being. There's no way you'd vote for a guy like that, would you? Except the major difference between 1992 and 2024 is this. Most of those Americans have already voted for this guy, and they didn't know about E. Jean Carroll, but they saw him on tape bragging about grabbing women by their you-know-what, and they still voted for him. So good luck, Democrats, telling yourselves and anyone who will listen there's no way Americans would ever vote for this guy, because all of the polling from all of the pollsters is flashing red lights at you that this man's going to get reelected president of the United States, because people may not like him, but they sure liked his economy. People may not like him, and they may actually like Joe Biden personally, but they sure as hell hate the job Joe Biden's doing. And when Donald Trump was president, we didn't have all these problems. So the people you say will never vote for Donald Trump, one, already voted for him, and two, no, they don't like him any more than you like him. But they're willing to vote for a guy who helped their home, helped their income, helped their kids' education, helped the world around them in ways that you Democrats have never appreciated Donald Trump did. And by the way, the people may not like Biden or Trump, but the people hate you people more than you are willing to admit. And y'all are so against Trump, they're willing to vote for him just to spite you. Never underestimate the power of spite. But you're in a bubble, and you're not going to figure it out until it's too late for you to do anything about it. And I will absolutely, should it happen, laugh.